the lane, 15-10, touchdown Chargers!
What's up, guys? Welcome into a brand new episode of Chargers Weekly. As always, joined by Matt Money Smith. We're taping this just really minutes after Kellen Moore's introductory press conference as offensive coordinator of the LA Chargers. Money, a bit of a stunner compared to what we thought the Chargers were going to do last week. You and I talked about pretty much everybody. I think we mentioned Kellen Moore's name in passing, not thinking that this would be like a real possibility, but here we are.
Well, I think the one thing that, and by no means am I doing this to say, hey, we know what we're talking about, but I think it was evident. We said, hey, either, they're not crazy about these candidates, nobody has really jumped out at them, or they're just waiting for Frank Reich to see if he's available, and then they'll hire someone. But I think the hiring of Kellen just kind of shows you that, perhaps none of those other candidates really wowed him. And the second Kellen became available, they interviewed, they hired, and he was their guy. So I think to me, that's encouraging. That means it's an offense they respect, it's an offensive coordinator and coach that they respect, and it's someone that they were determined to not get out of the building. Like we do not, their reports were out of Tampa that they desperately wanted him, down there. So we know he had other options, and the Chargers, the second that became available, immediately seized upon the opportunity, made sure the compensation was right so he didn't feel like he had to leave and take another interview, and locked him up. And, so like that part of it to me is great. I think had, they interviewed Zach Robinson, nothing against him, but, a week and a half ago, and then 2 weeks later, oh yeah, he's our OC, I'd be like, ooh, you'd think if he was the guy, you would have just hired him right away to make sure that he didn't end up somewhere else.
Yeah, and you see McVay hire Mike LaFleur with all these guys already in the building too. So I'm not saying that they're not great coaches and they won't eventually be offensive coordinators or head coaches, but good on the Chargers for kind of waiting this thing out and pouncing on the guy that was the right guy. And it's not necessarily the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan tree. Kellen has a really cool background in terms of the coaches and really players that he's learned from. You go back to Boise State with Chris Peterson, playing for Jim Caldwell, a quarterback guru, learning from Jason Garrett, who kind of runs that Air Coryell offense, and then getting an education with Mike McCarthy on the West Coast offense. So he has so many different backgrounds, and I know he'll just cater what he does best to this Chargers team. He said, we're going to make the best offense for the 2023 Chargers. So just overall takeaways, we just heard from him, Money.
Yeah, I like that he's a quarterback. I think there's a special connection that can, we talked about that last week as well. Like nothing against, former running backs. It's just you rarely see it. It seems like the most successful play callers tend to be former quarterbacks or offensive linemen, just players that had a lot of responsibilities on each and every snap, and centers, quarterbacks, things like that. So I do like that he has that connection with Justin. I do think there is something that's important about I guess when you're talking about doctors, it's bedside manner. I'm not trying to compare football coaches to that, but I do think there's the ability to communicate, the ability to see things, to connect on that level. Not just, someone that played in high school and college, but someone that played 6 years in the NFL as a quarterback is going to go a long way. In terms of the system, I love, part of me likes that it's not someone from Shanahan and McVay, because then I think you're hiring the system. You're not hiring the person. It's kind of we've talked about when talking about games, I don't like plays. I like players. Yep. Go tab the player to make the play, as opposed to, I drew this up and this is going to catch it. I think that's what this hire suggests. We weren't married to the idea that we had to hire someone from this particular system. They hired the best coordinator that they felt was available and that they were excited to get in here. And Kellen in his presser today, was asked, what's the core, what's the nucleus of the offense. How would you describe it? And he, detailed kind of exactly what you just did, Chris. He's like, I've been very lucky to play for all these people and learn from each of their systems and take something from it and try to figure out what works, And then he also said, just remember, though, that the offense that we're going to run is the 2023 Chargers offense, and it's dependent on not bringing my Cowboys offense here and saying, all right, everybody learn this. He's like, I got to figure out what we got. And that's the offense we're going to build. But, yeah, you mentioned it. The Dallas offense from Garrett he was an Air Coryell guy. That's what he ran and what he believed in, and he passed that on to Kellen. We know Coach Pete was super creative at Boise. I mean, one of the most creative play callers that we saw. You think of some of the great trick plays that he would run and just catching defenses flat-footed repeatedly. I mean, Kellen was 50-3 at Boise State, as a starter. So you've got that success. Mike McCarthy bringing the West Coast offense from Green Bay with him and asking Kellen to adopt some of those things. So someone who's got a pretty detailed a number of different details on his resume of offenses that he's been exposed to, what he's run. And you can't argue, Chris, with the numbers. I mean, statistically, the Cowboys offense has either been, in 2019 and 2021, the best offense in terms of yards. I think in 21 it was number one in scoring and in yards. Yep. So he's a guy that can, and put some points on a board.
Yeah, I go back to the 50-3 mark at Boise State. When you have a quarterback or an offensive coordinator, rather, that can kind of speak the same language as your quarterback, like Justin will know, what Kellen has been through, and vice versa, So I think that's really important. 50-3, you mentioned it, 142 touchdowns to 28 picks in college. He was one of the best college quarterbacks of all time.
Yeah.
So to get him in the building with Justin, obviously they have a relationship. We've seen the commercials. The commercials are pretty good. Is that just like an Idaho commercial? Like, where's that from?
Yeah, it's a Northwest. It's a company that's based in the Northwest, and obviously Kellen at Boise and Justin at Eugene, and we know how important that part of the country is to Justin and to Kellen, for that matter. And apparently it was just, in Van Der Esch as well, right? He was a Boise guy. So you got those three guys. Yeah, I think it's a regional commercial, and in the presser, if the people listening or watching didn't see it or hear it, Kellen mentioned it was 3 days, that they were together for 3 days, and that, he really didn't have a chance to get to know Justin prior to that, but felt like he got to, know him pretty well over those 3 days. So that's pretty cool to be able to, make that connection. And you would assume, it was a great interaction, because when Justin, I'm assuming, was informed, hey, Kellen's going to be available, he probably said, go get him. Let's do this. So there's that, just connection between these two.
Yeah. And Kellen was kind enough to join us on Zoom this morning, and really just it seems like a real likable guy. It's somebody who can get along with a lot of the players. He said he's texted, he's called players, and he's excited to learn more about the personnel that he has here. Also said that he's really happy with the staff that's in place. I think a quarterback coach still needs to be hired, Money, but what'd you make of that? That a lot of these guys that were on the staff last year seem to be going to carry over, I guess.
Yeah, so I guess I can just go through it for the people that, I took a bunch of notes of what other people asked, but I'll just go through what I asked him when I had the opportunity to engage with him. I already mentioned, the nucleus that, and of what he had kind of described. But I decided to end on kind of a light note. I ended up asking the last question, and I was kind of half joking. I mean, his brother, was under Kalen DeBoer, who's done an incredible job at Washington. They did an incredible job, at all of their stops together. And this last year at Fresno State, Jake Hayner's going to get drafted, and he's not going to get drafted on his measurables or on his physical abilities. He's a smart quarterback. He was put in really good positions by Kirby Moore, Kellen's brother, who was hired as the OC at Missouri. I'd be interested, and I said, hey, you're gonna bring your brother on staff to be your QB coach. Now his brother was a wide receiver. He wasn't a quarterback, but, we see that all the time. Different guys from different positions being different coaches. So, like I said, I was only half joking. It's like, look, man, he did a great job this last year with Fresno State. and with Jake Hayner. So I'd be interested if that wasn't a possibility, in terms of kind of that quarterback coach, because you would assume he's going to have probably the most input, or 50-50 between he and Coach Staley in terms of who they want. But I'm sure, it's going to be someone that Kellen's going to work with very closely. So he's going to want to have some sort of say. Now, Shane Day was a Brandon Staley hire paired up with Lombardi. Lombardi came from New Orleans. Shane came from Kyle Shanahan's staff. So it's possible that it's just someone that Brandon has in mind. But I don't think it's out of the question. I mean, you're talking about, Kellen Moore, who's had 4 years as an OC. Yes, he's young, but guy's been calling plays for 4 years. So he's got plenty of experience. You could bring in somebody that's not necessarily been around the NFL for a while. So,
hey, if it happens, you've investigated this. You kind of pulled this out of the last question, the presser.
No, Petros brought it up yesterday. He brought it up because he called a couple Fresno State games, and when Kellen was hired, he mentioned, he's like, man, his brother Kirby coordinated the hell out of that Fresno offense. He's like, they were really good, and I just know, from covering the draft, that there's been a lot of buzz around Jake. He's down at the Senior Bowl, and there's buzz about, hey, this could end up being the one quarterback that raises his hand at the Senior Bowl. Don't be surprised. So I know that that was a possibility. So it was just kind of like me sort of, paying attention to what was happening around me and what people had been talking about, and knowing that Kirby, was doing a really great job up at Fresno.
Yeah. So Brandon Staley and Kellen Moore were kind of matching wits preseason, joint practices. And I think that's kind of where that relationship kind of started. Just, we have these, and most people have been to training camp that watch or listen to this podcast, but if you haven't, there's two fields. There's offense versus defense, and vice versa on the other side. So, Brandon Staley calling the defense for the Chargers, Kellen Moore calling the offense for the Cowboys. These two young up-and-coming coaches were kind of matching wits in the preseason. So I think it's pretty cool that they've joined forces. And Kellen Money was very complimentary of the way Brandon calls the defense, and the fact that Staley was a former quarterback and can kind of see the game from the eyes of the quarterback calling the defense. So you have to imagine that these guys will bounce a bunch of ideas off of each other, and that iron sharpen iron cliche applies here for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's important. It just goes to show you, these joint practices and what teams take away, and just building relationships, finding staffs that you're comfortable with. We know that, Sean Payton and Anthony Lynn loved practicing against one another, just the respect that was there. And I do think that probably went a long way, in this hire, is that, he and Brandon, look, they're both football junkies. They're both former quarterbacks. It's not surprising that the two of them were chatting, in those joint practices. And he mentioned after practice, they would kind of hang out and chop it up a little bit and talk offense versus defense. And the fact that they're both, like I said, former quarterbacks, that was something he specifically mentioned, that he loves the way, that Coach Staley calls defense, because he calls it through the eyes of a quarterback, and he can see that in the way that he calls defense and the advantage that he has in doing that. So, yeah, no doubt joint practices went a long way. Spending those few days, a couple months before that with Justin, I think went a long way. And I think it shows in how fast this got put together. Just, and he had said, no, this was not something that was bubbling under for a while. He's like, it happened this weekend. We had the talk. Everything was great. And I'm here. So I think that's a product of the fact that there's familiarity and respect, mutual respect from all parties.
Yeah, Kellen Moore's getting head coaching interviews. His numbers kind of speak for themselves, but sometimes when you're in a position where you have a coach like Mike McCarthy who called plays in a Super Bowl, he has a way that he calls offense too. He thought that highly of Kellen Moore to keep him on staff and to kind of run the offense. And listen, when you're kind of where the Cowboys are at, just like where the Chargers were at, you kind of hit a wall and you want to mix it up. You want to change things up. And I think that like Kellen, he kind of nailed it. He just said, hey, change can be a good thing. So we mutually decided to kind of go our separate ways. He's happy for the way the Cowboys are going to do things, and he's happy for his opportunity. And then you kind of push it forward to this 2023 Chargers offense, what it's going to look like. Obviously, we know the pieces that are in place. Kellen knows the pieces that are in place. You brought up a good question about just the way that Zeke and Pollard were used, and he mentioned Eckler and everything that Austin's done in this league, and obviously Austin's going to have probably a huge year with Kellen Moore calling plays. But that second running back, he mentioned Joshua Kelly, but he also said, hey, we may want to get 2 or 3 guys in here and see who kind of wins that challenge.
Yeah, he's specifically said, just in his opinion, the days of a 25 carry back are over.
It's over.
Like it's not the way it operates in 2023. And I do think it speaks, to his coaching acumen and to his comfortability with players to say to someone like Zeke and to Jerry Jones, who gave him, $80 million, you know what, Zeke ain't going to be the bell cow anymore. It doesn't work like that, and he was paid to be that. And it was an offer. Remember the whole debate about, do you pay Dak? Do you pay Zeke? And, Jerry Jones, this is an offense that's built around Zeke Elliott. He's the centerpiece of, so you've got a guy who's 31 that's going to Jerry Jones and saying, hey, I'm glad you handed him that $80 million, but I kind of like running this Tony guy a little bit more, and I feel like we're in a bet. So to me, that speaks to, him not caring about, money plays, draft status plays, got to make the GM look good, got to make the, because he handed out the extension, because he drafted the guy. No, just whatever, man. You'll look good if we win games, and then everybody stays employed and makes a bunch of money, and it's great. And I think, that's what you saw from the Tony Pollard, emergence and the reduced role. And by the way, the success, just the fact that it worked, a guy that's going to stick his neck out and say, this is the way we need to run this, knowing that you're putting a target on your chest now because, you're taking carries and opportunities away from someone who's been in the discussion as the best running back in the league. So that's, I think that's very exciting to me, because I think that's such an important part of being a coordinator, is not being afraid to call or to call upon a player or to call a play that you believe in because of consequences, fear of consequences, and just playing it safe and being like, well, of course we handed the ball to Zeke 25 times. He's our bell cow. That's what we do. And then the blame, or the analysis can fall upon the player as opposed to the play caller. So I appreciate that from him. And look, I think Josh, we talked about it. Joshua Kelly, I thought, had a very good year with the opportunities he was given. Very excited about what he's going to be able to do, to be that hammer for Kellen Moore and Isaiah Spiller for that matter. You're going to have 3 backs in camp. Who's the 4th? Don't know. But I think you're going to have Spiller and Joshua and Austin, and I'm very excited about them, running in this Kellen Moore offense.
Yeah, first of all, Kellen got Tony Pollard paid. Wherever he's going in March, he's going to get a big pay bump, because it's easy to keep a guy in when he breaks off 30-yard runs, 50-yard runs, 60-yard receptions on a weekly basis. The way that Zeke and Pollard complemented each other was really the reason why the Cowboys were so successful this year, because Dak had his interception issues. And frankly, Kellen's getting a different quarterback in Justin. Justin can push the ball down the field. It may have been you too, Money, who asked the question about speed with Jalen Guyton going down, and how important speed is to an offense. Those are things that I think will be decided here in the next couple of months, whether it be free agency or the draft. Maybe that extra running back is someone they draft. Maybe there's a speed receiver in the draft or free agency that the Chargers will target to really complete this 2023 offense. So, he was complimentary of the line. Obviously, when you have Corey Linsley as your all-pro center and Rashawn Slater coming back, young pieces like Trey Pipkins and Zion, that's a good thing. But I do think that there's just a lot of pieces to this pie that are still out there that we will see in free agency and the draft, and you better believe Kellen Moore is going to have a big say in kind of the personnel he wants to see.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt there's a speed receiver in their future, based on his answer. He just you can't coach it. It changes everything. So I think you're going to see, at least some depth there. Beyond, Jalen, got to get a fast guy out there. He did mention, though, a lot of what Coach Lombardi and Staley had said, that, there's other ways to get the ball downfield. Obviously you can't argue with, Mike Williams' ability to win 50-50 balls. He talked about the route running of Keenan and how easily he gets open. He's like, that stuff, that's legit. There's ways to get the ball downfield with that. He said, but you can't coach speed, and raw speed is important. And that leads me to believe. And look, I think the one thing to remember too is like, look, there's free agents on the Cowboys, that could be interesting. You mentioned Tony Pollard. I think that's probably going to be a little bit too much of a big ticket item. But, maybe it's Dalton Schultz, who's played really good tight end down there. He's a free agent. It could be, a lot of times, look at what Coach Lombardi did by bringing Chase Daniel with him. Maybe he brings Cooper Rush with him. So and then just like look at Ryan Ficken, right? He brought J.K. Scott over and said, hey, this guy was, so you've got a new set of eyes, to some degree, a new scout to help out Tom and in the front office of, hey, these are some players that maybe were underappreciated, much like J.K. Scott. I know the numbers weren't pretty, but I had to play against him, and I know how good and you saw how that paid off, how much that paid off for the Chargers this year. So I would be very surprised if we didn't find players that were in Kellen Moore's orbit on this roster, be it backups, depth pieces that can help teach the offense. Like, to me, I think, I would love for Easton Stick to be back. I do think he's been real important to Justin in that quarterback room. He's an incredibly smart player.
How many wins does Easton Stick and Kellen Moore have combined, Money?
Yeah,
was it
right.
like 96 wins in college or something crazy? Or what was Stick, 49-3?
I think Easton was 49, so you got 99 wins between them.
So you got 50-3 and 49-3.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that'll be interesting because look, the reason Chase was on the roster was because of Coach Lombardi, his just knowledge of the offense, and Justin certainly appreciated that. So I could see that happening. A former backup in Dallas end up coming over. I do think tight ends, look, we know how important tight ends are. I mean, we just saw it, and Dallas Goedert and Travis Kelce, and how important Hayden Hurst for the Bengals, George Kittle for the 49ers. I mean, look at the conference championship games. So that's a possibility.
Didn't DJ have the tight end from Utah in his first mock going to
Dalton
the Chargers?
Kincaid, yeah. And I know I've mentioned it here. Look, I'm looking through red-tinted glasses because I called the game against USC when he had like 260 yards in that win, and they had absolutely zero answers for him. So draft-wise, I think the other thing to remember too, Chris, is just how important the O-line is to Dallas and how important that was to their success. And how much they invested in the offensive line repeatedly. Interior, Travis Frederick, Zach Martin on the edges, Collins and Smith, and he mentioned Corey by name, someone that you repeatedly bring up. He, that when he was asked about the offensive line, the first thing he said, he goes, look, when you got someone like Corey Linsley, man, that changes everything. And he mentioned how valuable he is. So, that's something that he's looking at. And when you look at just what's available to him, I'm not saying Zach Martin's probably the best interior lineman. He's in the conversation with Quentin Nelson. Nelson had a bit of a step back this past season. So you're talking about someone that knows how important interior line play is. That obviously with Tyron Smith knows how important having that left tackle is. And I think he ends up kind of getting, with Slater, someone very similar to Tyron, just set him and forget him. He gets a great center. And Corey Linsley, set it, forget it, and now he can play around. He kind of like how he did in Dallas with Trey and Filer and Zion, or however that, and whomever that kind of how that equation gets put together. But I think that's something that's worth watching as well.
I like your point though about the fact that Kellen has seen a lot of other offensive pieces throughout his time with the Cowboys. Similar to like Staley. When Staley kind of remade this defense in year two, he had guys that he had either coached before or had coached against, whether it was J.C. Jackson or Bryce Callahan or guys from the Rams, Sebastian Joseph Day, Morgan Fox. So maybe it's not necessarily a Cowboy, but maybe it's somebody in the NFC East that was given the Cowboys fits, or somebody in the NFC that the Chargers didn't necessarily cross paths with. So I like that aspect of it. All in all, I do think it's refreshing. I think it's a refreshing hire. It's not exactly that McVay, Shanahan mold. You're getting a mix of different trees. And frankly, I think Justin can do everything. And if there's some Air Coryell mixed in with some West Coast offense, I think Justin can accomplish everything that Kellen wants to put out on his plate.
Yeah, no doubt. And again, I think unfortunately, sometimes, the lasting impression is the last impression. And we all know what that final play was for the Dallas Cowboys with Zeke at center getting buried in the ground on that 3rd and long. And
people just like to make fun, though, man. Like, what were they going to do? Obviously, it was a terrible.
Exactly.
It went horribly wrong. But come on,
it's a bad look. But whatever. You're not going. I think it's much more important to remove that one play and instead focus on 4 years. And when you combine the 4 years, it's the number 2 overall offense in the NFL behind the Chiefs. That's what Kellen Moore coordinated. And if you look, whatever numbers you want to go through, our friend Eric Smith at Chargers.com, did a great piece on the website, just kind of about what to know about Kellen Moore. And if I had it up, I'd be able to go through it because he did a great job. But one of the things that he brought up was just, okay, how do you want to break this down? Yeah, here you go. 5 things to know about OC Kellen Moore. He's like, however you want to break it down by the numbers, here's what they are. And it's and it was EPA. Like I thought it was there. Maybe it was a different. It might have been a different. Yeah, it might have been a different article. I wish I could give credit where it was, but read the one from Eric too.
Eric was good too.
Yeah, they talk about, expected points added in the passing game, expected points added in the running game, expected points added on 3rd down. Like all of that was broken down, and the Cowboys were top 10 in everything. So you're talking about somebody that coordinated an elite offense. Now, he had elite pieces, Pollard, Zeke, CeeDee Lamb, Michael Gallup. There's good players out there. Amari Cooper, no doubt about it. But he's got good players here. Like that's my pushback to that. It's like, well, they invested heavily on offense, draft capital, free agency. They did not hold back when it came to putting an offense together. And it's like, well, yeah. And he's coming to a place that's got Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, Mike Williams, Keenan Allen. Like he's got weapons here. And so it's, those 2 things. And I'm guessing that was a big part of why he chose this job as opposed to, just doing the, kind of doing the rounds and seeing if he could maybe maximize a little bit more money here or there. My guess is he just looked at the roster and was like, yeah, this is going to work.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break. On the other side, we'll talk about some other big news in the NFL. The division may have just got a little bit tougher. All right, guys, if you've been dreaming of going to the Super Bowl, there's only one way to get official ticket packages. On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL, they offer exclusive access to 50-yard line seats, official pregame parties next to the stadium, postgame field access, and much more. Visit NFLOnLocation.com or search NFL On Location today. Your Super Bowl experience of a lifetime awaits, only with On Location. So, Money, the Pro Bowl, the new look Pro Bowl is this weekend, and Justin Herbert would have gone, but he had surgery on his labrum. It was announced by the team over the weekend. Doesn't look to be serious, should be ready for off-season activities, but still a big piece of news.
I think it was his left one too, right? Left labrum, so not his throwing arm.
Non-throwing.
He'll be fine. He'll be fine. The one thing that kind of jumped out at me when I saw that is, maybe that explains why you don't necessarily want to drop your pad level, lower your shoulder on a QB sneak, and get in the middle of all that. If you've got a busted up labrum and it's not feeling great, the last thing you want is some 320-pound guys beating on as you're trying to get your pad level low.
Sure.
That was one of the first things I thought of. By the way, just, I did ask Kellen, Coach Moore, about QB sneaks. And I think it's not just going back to our conversation about Jacksonville, but just what Philly does. And you watched Philadelphia in that game against, San Francisco, and they just couldn't stop them. Any quarterback sneak was and just kind of what the rules are. And I think Charger fans will be happy to know. He's like, oh, yeah, we sneaked the hell out of the ball in Dallas. Like, we did it all the time. He's like, there's just such an unfair advantage with the rules being the way they are, where you can get big guys behind you pushing the pile. He's like, there's a reason why you see Philly, and, he had to see it twice a year. So I think if you're wondering if he's going to call jet sweeps on 3rd and a half yard It's not going to. He even said, like, he goes, I just don't. He said it doesn't make any sense to hand the ball to a running back that's 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage when you've got the ball 3 feet away. I mean, that was his exact answer. So I was very excited by that.
What's so ironic about how successful Philly has been with quarterback sneaks is that Shane Steichen and Nick Sirianni were with Phillip Rivers for years with the Chargers.
Right. And Phillip refused to sneak the ball.
He wouldn't do it. Yeah, he
would not do it. He got a hand injury 1 year doing it, and he was like, I'll never do it again. And he like busted a thumb or something like that, or a finger, and he said he would never do it again. Yeah, it's funny. It's a great call. But, and now Shane and Nick, more than any, historically, historic numbers from Philadelphia this year. There had never been that many sneaks on an offense. It just goes to show you they're like, boy. I'd see. Look, I'm a jerk, but I'd run somebody else out. I'd be like, all right, Phil, get off the field. Get in there. Charlie Whitehurst, get in there. Yeah. You're sneaking. Excuse me, you heard me?
Get in there.
Kellen, get out there. You're sneaking the ball. That's how I would have dealt with that. I'm not kidding. Like, I 100% would have.
So the Pro Bowl games now, Derek Carr is your Pro Bowl AFC quarterback money.
Tyler Huntley. Who threw 2 touchdown passes. Now remember, there's no Pro Bowl this year. They're like the Pro Bowl is
the Pro Bowl games.
It's a carnival. It's carnival games. It's like egg toss, 3-legged race,
balloon, water balloon.
Yeah, water balloon toss. It's a dunk tank or something along those lines. So yeah, it's they're trying to. The thing about the NFL, for those that want to make fun of it and say, why are we doing this? Because 9 million people watched it last year.
Because it'll rate higher than an NBA playoff game.
The Laker Clipper game was a 1.3 rating. 1.3. The Pro Bowl got 9 million viewers for a game that everybody knows is ridiculous. So maybe this year will be interesting. Who knows?
It'll still be a bananas rating, I'm sure.
Yeah. But yes, to your labrum thing, that's the first thing that popped into my head is, maybe that's why I didn't want to sneak it. Got to bust it up labrum.
Yeah, good point. All right, on to the Broncos. Sean Payton is going to the AFC West, going to Denver. A trade, so it's a first-round pick to New Orleans this year and a second next, and then the Saints will give the Broncos the rights to Sean Payton and a third-round pick, I believe, in 2024. Yeah. So that's how it works. A big price to pay, but Broncos ownership, I think they knew they needed to hit a grand slam knowing what happened with Russ this past year.
Yeah, look, I mean, Sean Payton's one of the great offensive play callers in the history of football. I mean, not just currently, in the history of football. I mean, those Saints offenses, it didn't matter who was out there. What the injury situation was at wide receiver, at running back, at quarterback. I mean, that dude was putting up points. Probably should have gone to a second Super Bowl, on the wrong end of a bad call against the Rams when they went, back in 2019. But
Nickel Roby-Coleman.
Exactly. But won a Super Bowl being bold, right? Open in the second half with an onside kick. Like, he's legit, and that is a big hire. You want to talk about an upgrade from Nate Hackett to Sean Payton, it's there. Now, having said that, man, there's a lot of pressure. And I'm not saying, nowadays the cliche is pressure's a privilege. Well, when I grew up, pressure burst pipes. That's what I used to hear from my coaches. When they could look in your eyes, you'd be freaking out. You got 2 number ones or 3 number ones and players that were traded for Russell Wilson. You got a guy that's got, $140 million of guaranteed money left. And now you're going to give, according to the rumors, 21 to 23 million bucks a year and another 1 and a 2 of draft capital for this guy. It better work. Man, it better work. Because if it doesn't, that is a lot of money, and it is a lot of draft capital.
What's the years? Did we hear the years for that?
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
The more the most interesting thing to come out of that for me is, and I haven't looked today, but as of last night, Ian Rappaport was not backing down from his report. The Broncos called him out, said that it is patently false, that it is completely fabricated, but it was still there. And he said, the Broncos were scrambling. They had a secret meeting with Jim Harbaugh, trying to convince him to take the job. He declined. And then they doubled back and tried to convince DeMeco Ryans, hours before the Texans hired him to take the job. And he said, no, I'm going to Houston. And that's when they pivoted back to Payton and gave up what the Saints wanted and gave Payton what he wanted. So if that in fact is true, man, that's, again, pressure. Like,
yeah, I think you spin that to Sean Payton by saying, "Hey, man, like of course we wanted you, but we have to give up so much to get
right.
you."
100%.
So like, that's the reason why we're looking at all options here.
I mean, but that's what I mean. Like, they didn't want to give it up.
Yeah.
They're like, man, that's too much. We don't want to be paying this much, and we don't want to be giving up this draft capital. We're already sure. So that's what I mean. Like, that's the amount of pressure that you're now under. Like, they didn't want to do that, according to Rappaport, but they did because they got, the two guys that they really wanted, Harbaugh and Ryans, turned him down. And this was so. So
what I want to know is who's going to be the backup quarterback in Denver? Who is Sean Payton going to bring in to challenge Russ? And, maybe it'll be Russ's job, undisputed, going in, but you have to imagine Sean Payton took a year off. He watched a lot of football this past offseason. He has relationships with quarterbacks throughout the league. I'm not saying it's going to be a guy from the Saints like a Jameis Winston. It could be, maybe. But is there going to be a quarterback that comes in there that knows Sean Payton's system that can potentially push Russell Wilson or at least make it a little bit uncomfortable for him in training camp?
I mean, I suppose, I don't know what the number is on Taysom Hill. It's a weird contract, so I don't know what that looks like. But I can't imagine Andy Dalton or Jameis Winston pushing Russ. We do know that Sean he's aggressive. He's abrasive. So he's, and I think that's one of the I think that's why, you saw Jim Harbaugh, you saw Sean Payton, guys that they knew were going to get into Russ and not, cater to him, be intimidated by him in the least. And I think for D'Amico, you could just see his relationship with players, how good he is with players. And perhaps that was the other approach. It's like, all right, well, maybe this is the way we handle it. But look, it's an upgrade. It's a big. I don't think there's no other way to spin it. Sean Payton can call offense, man. And if I don't know who else they could have hired that I would have been like, yeah, that's a better option for Russ and the offense. Now, remember, look, we know what Sean Payton's offense looks like because we just saw it for 2 years. That's not what Russ does. There have been countless people that have tried to get Russ to get the ball out quick, to throw on time, and that's just not the way he operates. So it'll be interesting to see, what Sean does, to try to maximize what Wilson has going.
You keep in mind, too, Tim Patrick got hurt before the season started, Javonte Williams, who I think they need to really center that offense around once he's 100%. Sean Payton's going to have those two guys to add to the stable of pass catchers that they have in Denver. And final thing, Tom Brady, it looks like this is it now. It looks like he is retired finally, 45 years old, 23 years in the NFL, 10 Super Bowls, 7 titles, every record imaginable. Don't think we'll see number 12 in an NFL uniform again.
No, and my takeaway is I was convinced he was going to the Raiders. That is everything that I had heard, that was done. That he
there was a report today
Vegas.
That he was never going to leave the Bucs if he stayed. But I mean,
that's what's so strange. So, like, for me, that's what jumps out at me. Is, okay, now what do you do? If that's because I think that's a big reason why they sat, Derek, was just to kind of signal, hey, we're open for business, So now I don't know what you do. Is it Garoppolo? Is he able to stay healthy? Do you draft a quarterback? I mean, I can't imagine that with Devontae Adams, who's 30. With Darren Waller, with Josh Jacobs, like this offense is ready to go. It is not ready to
Aaron
have a quarterback
Rodgers.
need.
Is Aaron Rodgers a name?
I mean, yeah, I suppose you could do the Aaron Rodgers thing. That would make sense, right? Get him out there to pair him, and that way you get him out of the NFC. So that works. They get a couple picks back. So maybe that's the path. And you're cutting $40 million in salary, and you're bringing in $40 million in salary, so that works too. Yeah, that's a good call. Maybe that's the direction they'll go.
Can you imagine? You got Russ, Mahomes, Herbert, and Aaron Rodgers. Oh,
let's go!
Division.
Sign me up. Love it. Absolutely love it.
Oh man! All right. Anything else? I think next week we'll talk Senior Bowl. Kind of get reactions from the week that was and the game. It's so hard right now because you get these practices midweek and you'll hear who's hot, who's not, and we can get a kind of a full picture next week. DJ's down there, right?
Yep. Follow at Move the Sticks.
Yeah.
He'll keep you updated. Him, our friend at Bucky Brooks, both down there with NFL Network, so they'll keep you in tune to who's showing out, just like Justin did a few years ago at the Senior Bowl.
Exactly. A lot of former Senior Bowl guys on this Chargers roster. So I think all 32 teams really value that game, but the Chargers have really gotten some good talent from Mobile. So we'll recap that next week. Money, appreciate it, bro. Appreciate you guys watching and listening. For Money, I'm Chris. This has been Chargers Weekly. All right, guys, thanks again for listening to Chargers Weekly. And if you've been dreaming of going to the Super Bowl, there's only one way to get official ticket packages. On Location, the official hospitality partner of the NFL. They offer exclusive access to 50-yard line seats, official pregame parties next to the stadium, postgame field access, and much more. Visit NFLOnLocation.com or search NFL On Location today. Your Super Bowl experience of a lifetime awaits, only with On Location.